A stray cat persistently guides firefighters to a hidden blaze. Their shocking discovery inside reveals the cat's urgent mission. And if you cherish your family and love stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and avoid 10 years of bad luck. The emergency call came in at 2:47 a.m. Tom Mason sat up straight in his chair at the Maplewood Fire Station, his coffee cup still warm in his hands. The dispatcher's voice crackled through the speakers, reporting a structure fire at 1242 Oak Street, an old storage warehouse on the edge of town. Tom moved with practiced efficiency, but his movements carried the weight of someone who'd seen too much. 3 years had passed since Sarah's accident, but every emergency call still brought back memories of that night. The one call he couldn't respond to because he was already on duty across town. "Gear up," he called to his team, pushing aside the familiar ache in his chest. Jake and Alex, his regular crew members, were already sliding into their protective equipment. The routine was automatic: boots, pants, jacket, helmet. Each piece of gear added another layer between Tom and his thoughts. The engine sirens cut through the quiet night as they sped toward Oak Street. Tom gripped the wheel, his knuckles white beneath his gloves. The warehouse district was mostly abandoned these days, which meant fewer people at risk, but also fewer witnesses to report fires before they got out of control. As they rounded the final corner, orange flames were already licking the night sky. The old warehouse, a wooden structure that had seen better days, was partially engulfed. Tom's training kicked in as he assessed the situation. Single-story building, multiple entry points, wind direction favorable for containment. That's when he saw her, a gray tabby cat pacing frantically near the warehouse's side entrance. Most animals fled from fires, but this one was different. The cat, they would later learn her name was Ginger, was moving back and forth, letting out loud, distressed meows that carried even over the crackling flames. "Boss, we've got a situation here," Jake called out, already unrolling the main hose line. But Tom's attention was fixed on the cat. 15 years of firefighting had taught him to trust his instincts, and something about this cat's behavior set off alarm bells in his mind. Ginger locked eyes with Tom, and in that moment, he felt an unexpected connection. The cat's amber eyes held a desperate intelligence that reminded him of Sarah's gaze, determined, focused, pleading for help. Without hesitation, the cat darted toward the warehouse door, then looked back at Tom expectantly. "Alex, get the thermal imaging camera," Tom ordered, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "Jake, charge that line and be ready to provide coverage. I think we've got live victims inside." The cat continued its frantic pacing, meowing with increasing urgency. As Alex returned with the camera, they could hear it, faint but distinct mewling coming from within the burning building. Kittens. There were kittens trapped inside. Tom's jaw clenched as he made quick calculations. The fire wasn't yet between them and the entrance where Ginger was indicating. They had a narrow window of opportunity, but that window was closing fast. The warehouse's old wooden beams wouldn't hold much longer under the intense heat. With each passing second, the fire grew more intense. The heat pressed against them like a physical wall, and the smoke billowed thicker and darker. But Ginger remained by the entrance, her determination matching Tom's own. He knew that every second counted, just as they had counted that night with Sarah. This time, though, he was here. This time, he could make a difference. The decision crystallized in his mind. They would follow the cat's lead. Tom signaled to his team to prepare for entry, knowing that what came next would test not just their train, and courage, but also their trust in each other, and in a desperate mother cat who refused to abandon her babies to the flames. The team gathered at the warehouse entrance, their breathing apparatus already strapped in place. Tom ran through the standard safety checks, muscle memory taking over despite the urgency of the situation. He'd done this hundreds of times, but each fire was different. Each rescue carried its own risks. "Remember your training," Tom said through his mask, his voice slightly muffled but firm. "Alex, you're on point with the thermal camera. Jake, you're backing us up with the hose line. We stay together, we move fast, and we get out faster." Jake pulled Tom aside for a moment, his expression serious beneath his helmet visor. "Before we go in, Tom, I need to tell you something." The younger firefighter's voice cracked slightly. My mom, she died in a fire when I was 12. Never told anyone on the team before, but watching that cat out there. He gestured toward Ginger, who remained vigilant by the door. It reminds me of how our neighbor's dog kept barking that night, trying to alert everyone. Tom placed a heavy gloved hand on Jake's shoulder. The gesture was automatic, but the weight of shared grief made it meaningful. He thought about Sarah, about all the times he'd avoided talking about her death with the team. Maybe it was time to stop carrying these burdens alone. We all have our ghosts, Jake, Tom replied, his voice steady. They make us better at what we do, as long as we don't let them paralyze us. Your mom would be proud, seeing you here today. The moment of connection was broken by the sharp crack of burning timber. Inside the warehouse, the fire was growing hungrier. The temperature around them had risen noticeably in just these few minutes of preparation. Even through their protective gear, they could feel the intense heat radiating from the building. Tom took point as they entered the warehouse. The smoke was thick, reducing visibility to near zero despite their powerful flashlights. The beams of light reflected off the dense black smoke, creating an almost solid wall of darkness ahead of them. The roar of the fire filled their ears, along with the ominous creaking of stressed wood above. Alex, what's the thermal reading? Tom called out, keeping his voice clear and controlled despite the chaos around them. They moved in formation, each step calculated and precise. The floor beneath them was solid, but they couldn't take anything for granted in these conditions. Temperatures climbing fast, boss, Alex reported. We've got hot spots developing in the ceiling. Structure's not going to hold much longer. The thermal camera's screen showed a patchwork of oranges and reds, with dangerous whites beginning to bloom overhead. They pushed deeper into the warehouse, following the general direction where they'd heard the kittens. The heat was becoming oppressive, and their air supplies were already ticking down. Tom felt sweat running down his back despite the protective gear. Every firefighter knew the clock was always running. On their air supply, on the building's structural integrity, on the victim's chances of survival. The fire had transformed the familiar space of a warehouse into something alien and threatening. Shelving units loomed out of the smoke like skeletal figures, and every few seconds, something would crash or shatter in the distance. The noise was constant. The roar of flames, the crack of burning wood, the hiss of hot metal cooling when hit by water spray. Through their masks, they could smell the acrid scent of burning materials. Tom recognized the distinct odors: wood, plastic, maybe some old machine oil. Each scent told a story about what was burning, what dangers might be lurking in the smoke. These were the details that could save lives, the small things that experienced firefighters noticed even in the midst of chaos. Jake maintained a steady SD, Ream with the hose, creating a protective corridor through which they could advance. The water turned to steam as it hit the hot surfaces, adding another layer to the already poor visibility. But they kept moving, guided by Alex's thermal readings and Tom's instincts. Tom thought about Sarah again, about how she'd always said he had a sixth sense for danger. Right now, that sense was screaming at him that they needed to move faster. The building was deteriorating more quickly than he'd anticipated. They had minutes, not hours, to find those kittens and get out. Stay close, he ordered, his voice cutting through the chaos. We're going to find them, but we need to do it now. The urgency in his tone left no room for argument. His team trusted him, and he trusted them. Together, they pressed deeper into the inferno, knowing that somewhere in this burning maze, several tiny lives were depending on them to reach them in time. The first kitten's cry pierced through the roar of the fire, weak but distinct. Tom held up his fist, signaling the team to stop. They stood motionless, straining to hear through their protective gear and the chaos around them. The sound came again slightly to their left. There! Alex called out, swinging the thermal camera in that direction. I'm picking up small heat signatures behind that fallen shelving unit. Count of 4, no, 5 distinct shapes. The shelving unit had collapsed against a wall, creating a triangular space behind it. The kittens must have huddled there, trapped but protected from the worst of the fire. As they approached, a deep rumble vibrated through the building. Tom's head snapped up, his flashlight beam cutting through the smoke to reveal the ceiling beams shifting ominously above them. "Structure's compromising," he announced, his voice terse. "Alex, you're smallest. Get in there and grab those kittens. Jake and I will stabilize this section as best we can." Time was running out. They all knew it without having to say it. Alex didn't hesitate. Handing the thermal camera to Jake, she crawled into the narrow space behind the shelving. The kittens' cries grew louder, more desperate. Above them, the ceiling groaned again, and a shower of burning debris rained down nearby. Tom and Jake positioned themselves on either side of the shelving unit, using their bodies and equipment to brace it. The metal was hot even through their protective gear. Sweat poured down Tom's face inside his mask, and his muscles strained against the weight of the collapsing structure. "Got to," Alex's voice called out. She passed the tiny bodies to Jake, who quickly tucked them into a special pocket in his turnout gear. The kittens were tiny, probably only a few weeks old, their eyes barely open. Another section of ceiling crashed down 20 feet away, sending a wave of heat and sparks washing over them. The timeline was shrinking fast. Tom's air supply gauge showed less than half remaining. They needed to move. "3 more," Alex reported, her voice strained as she stretched further into the space. "They're scared, trying to get away from me." "Got another one." The building shuddered again, and this time Tom heard the distinctive sound of major structural failure beginning somewhere above them. His years of experience told him they had maybe 2 minutes before this section of the roof came down. "Alex, we're calling it," he shouted. "Get out of there now." "Almost got them. All of them." Alex began backing out of the space, cradling the last 2 kittens against her chest. As she emerged, another support beam gave way, crashing down mere feet from their position. The impact sent vibrations through the floor, and the shelving unit they'd been bracing shifted dangerously. "Move! Move! Move!" Tom ordered, maintaining his position until Alex was clear. Jake had already wrapped the kittens in his arms, protecting them from the increasing rain of burning debris. The path they'd come in through was rapidly becoming blocked by fallen beams and burning material. Tom's mind raced, calculating angles and options. Their original entry point was compromised, but he remembered seeing a side door during their initial sweep. It would be a gamble. They didn't know what obstacles lay between them and that exit, but it was their best chance. "Follow me," he commanded, taking point again. "Stay tight to my back. We're going for the east exit." He didn't wait for acknowledgement. His team would follow. They trusted each other absolutely in moments like this. They had to. The heat was becoming unbearable. The air near the ceiling had to be close to flashover temperatures, and the smoke was so thick it seemed solid. Tom led them through the maze of fallen debris, every step calculated, every movement precise. The kittens had gone quiet in Jake's arms. Whether from fear or smoke, they couldn't tell. Time seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously. Each second felt like an hour, but somehow only minutes had passed since they'd found the kittens. Tom's world narrowed to the space immediately around them. The next step, the next obstacle, the next decision that would either lead them to safety or... He pushed that thought aside. Sarah's face flashed in his mind again, but this time it wasn't filled with accusation or loss. This time, he saw her smile, saw the determination that had made him fall in love with her. They were getting out. All of them. The alternative simply wasn't acceptable. Through the thick smoke ahead, a faint green glow appeared, the exit sign above the side door. They were almost there. Behind them, the sound of collapse grew louder, closer, more urgent. The building was coming down, but they weren't going to be inside when it did. Tom reached for his radio, keying it to full power to cut through any interference. "Command, this is Mason. We're coming out the east side. 5 kittens recovered. Need immediate medical support for smoke exposure." The response was garbled but affirming. "Help will be waiting." The door was just ahead now, its outline barely visible through the smoke. 20 more feet. 10. 5. Tom's hand reached for the push bar, praying it wasn't locked, praying the frame hadn't warped in the heat. Behind them, the final collapse began. The door burst open under Tom's weight, releasing a blast of cool night air that that felt like salvation. They stumbled out into the darkness, the warehouse groaning its final protest behind them. Jake stumbled, protecting the kittens as he fell to one knee. Alex immediately moved to help him, but her own exhaustion was evident in her slower-than-usual movements. "Jake!" Tom turned back, his heart racing. The younger firefighter waved him off, but Tom could see he was favoring his right ankle. "Just twisted it on the way out." Jake managed through heavy breaths, still clutching the precious cargo against his chest. "The kittens are okay. They're all okay." His voice cracked with a mixture of pain and relief. The medical team rushed forward with oxygen tanks and equipment. The warehouse's final collapse thundered behind them, sending a shower of sparks into the night sky. Tom watched as paramedics helped Jake onto a gurney, carefully taking the kittens from his arms and placing them in a specially prepared warming container. Need to check them for smoke inhalation," Jake insisted, trying to sit up despite the paramedics' gentle restraint. Tom placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "You've done your part," he said, his voice steady despite his own exhaustion. "Let the medics do theirs." The words triggered a memory. Sarah saying almost the exact same thing to him once, after he'd worked a 36-hour shift during a forest fire season. A familiar meow cut through the chaos. Ginger had appeared seemingly out of nowhere, pacing anxiously near the medical team as they examined her kittens. Her fur was singed in places, but she showed no sign of caring about her own condition. Her eyes remained fixed on her babies, and occasionally she would look up at Tom with that same intense gaze that had first drawn him to follow her. "Remarkable animal," one of the paramedics commented, carefully examining each kitten. "They're all alive. Smoke exposure is minimal. That fallen shelving unit actually created a pocket of cleaner air." Another few minutes, though. Tom removed his helmet and breathing apparatus, letting the cool night air hit his sweat-soaked face. He watched as Alex gave her report to the incident commander, her gestures animated despite her fatigue. She performed flawlessly under pressure, just as she always did. They all had. "Boss," Jake called from the gurney. "Remember what you said inside? About our ghosts making us better at what we do." He paused, wincing as the paramedic wrapped his ankle. "I think maybe they do more than that. Maybe they lead us where we need to be." Tom looked down at Ginger, who had moved closer to him, her tail wrapping around his boot. The cat's presence felt significant, almost supernatural. She had trusted him, with the most precious thing in her world. Just like the town trusted them every time the alarm rang. "Your mom would be proud," Tom said again, but this time he wasn't just saying it to comfort Jake. He meant it. Looking at his team, at the rescued kittens, at this brave mother cat, he felt something shift inside him. The weight of Sarah's death didn't feel lighter, exactly, but it felt different. More like a guide than a burden. The paramedics finished their initial assessment of Jake's ankle. A mild sprain that would keep him on light duty for a few weeks, but nothing more serious. The kittens were responding well to oxygen therapy, their tiny bodies already showing signs of recovery. Ginger had finally allowed herself to be examined, though she insisted on staying close enough to maintain visual contact with her babies. As the adrenaline began to fade, Tom felt every one of his 45 years. His muscles ached, his lungs burned despite the protection of his breathing apparatus, and the emotional weight of the night pressed down on him. But there was something else too, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. Purpose. Connection. The incident commander approached, notepad in hand for the official report. But before he could speak, Tom heard another sound that made his heart skip a beat. A second crash from inside the warehouse, followed by the unmistakable sound of something falling through the weakened floor. "There's a basement," Tom realized aloud, his tired body instantly alert again. The blueprints didn't show a basement. The implications hit him like a physical blow. If there was an undocumented basement, what else about this fire wasn't what it seemed? Ginger's ears perked up at the sound, and she turned to stare at the burning building with an intensity that sent a chill down Tom's spine. Something about this fire wasn't right, and somehow, this cat knew more than any of them. The community gathered around the scene as dawn broke over Maplewood. Local news crews had arrived, their cameras capturing the smoldering remains of the warehouse against the purple-orange sky. Tom stood apart from the crowd, watching as the investigation team began their preliminary assessment of the scene. "You and your team did something extraordinary tonight," Chief Martinez said, appearing beside Tom. "5 lives saved, no serious injuries. That's a win in my book." She paused, studying the warehouse ruins. "But that basement concerns me. I've been chief here for 15 years, and I never knew that building had a lower level." Tom nodded, his eyes fixed on Ginger, who sat regally beside the medical tent where her kittens were being treated. The cat hadn't moved from her vigilant position, but her attention kept shifting between her babies and the warehouse ruins, as if she were trying to tell them something else. "Permission to join the investigation team?" Tom asked, though his muscles screamed for rest. Chief Martinez shook her head. "Get some rest first. You've been on shift for..." She checked her watch. 20 hours now. The scene isn't going anywhere. Her tone made it clear this wasn't a suggestion. Tom made his way to the medical tent, where Jake was preparing to be transported to the hospital for a proper examination of his ankle. The younger firefighter was still insisting he could walk it off, but protocol was protocol. "Hey, boss," Jake called out, his face grimy but wearing a tired smile. "The medics say the kittens are doing great. All 5 of them. Can you believe it? They're fighters, just like their mom." Tom knelt beside the container where the kittens were resting, each one cleaned and wrapped in warm blankets. Their tiny chests rose and fell steadily, a sight that made something tight in his chest loosen slightly. Ginger approached, rubbing against his leg before settling next to the container, purring loudly. "You know," Jake said, his voice quieter now, "when we were in there and everything was coming down around us, I thought about what you said about ghosts. And I realized something. Maybe we're not just carrying our losses. Maybe they're carrying us too." The words hit Tom hard. He thought about Sarah, about how her memory had both haunted and guided him through the years. Tonight, facing death again, he hadn't felt the usual paralyzing guilt. Instead, he'd felt her strength, her determination. A small crowd had gathered nearby, local residents who'd watched the drama unfold. Some brought blankets and pet supplies for the kittens. Others offered coffee and food to the firefighters. Mrs. Chun from the local diner approached with a tray of sandwiches, tears in her eyes. "My grandmother used to say that cats can see things we can't," she said, setting the tray down. "That they know when something isn't right." She looked meaningfully at Ginger, who met her gaze with those intelligent amber eyes. Alex joined them, having finished her debriefing. She accepted a sandwich gratefully, then turned to Tom. The investigation team found something interesting in the initial sweep. Some of the debris near where we heard that second collapse. It looks like there might have been recent construction down there. Unauthorized construction. Tom absorbed this information, watching as Ginger's ears twitched. The cat's attention was now fully focused on the warehouse again, her tail swishing back and forth in an agitated pattern. When Sarah died, Tom found himself saying, surprising even himself with the words, "I thought I'd never feel connected to anything again. Thought maybe that was safer. You know? Keep everyone at arm's length, do the job, go home." He reached down to stroke Ginger's fur. But tonight felt different. The team gathered around him, creating a moment of quiet solidarity amid the chaos of the scene. Even the kittens seemed to sense the importance of the moment, their tiny mews joining their mother's purring in a strange but comforting chorus. "To those we've lost," Jake said softly, raising his water bottle in a toast. "And to those we've found." The sun had fully risen now, casting long shadows across the scene. The warehouse was a blackened skeleton against the morning sky, its secrets still hidden in the basement below. Tom looked at his team, at the kittens, at Ginger, and felt something he hadn't experienced in years. The desire to dig deeper, to uncover the truth, to protect not just lives but justice. The letter in his pocket, the one he'd found slipped under his door last week warning about suspicious activities at the warehouse, seemed to burn against his chest. He hadn't mentioned it during the initial report, but now, looking at the determination in Ginger's eyes, he knew he couldn't ignore it any longer. The next few days transformed Tom's modest ranch house into an impromptu cat sanctuary. He'd volunteered to foster Ginger and her kittens until they could find permanent homes, though something in his gut told him these cats weren't going anywhere. The spare bedroom became their nursery, complete with heating pads and soft blankets donated by the community. "You're a natural at this," Dr. Reynolds, the local vet, commented during her follow-up visit. She watched as Tom carefully bottle-fed the smallest kitten, whom he'd started calling Spark. Most people wouldn't take on 5 kittens and their mother right after a trauma like that fire. Tom adjusted the bottle slightly as Spark kneaded the air with tiny paws. "Feels right somehow," he replied, "like they're supposed to be here." He didn't mention how having them around seemed to ease the loneliness that had been his constant companion since Sarah's death. Ginger sat on the windowsill, her position offering a clear view of both her kittens and the street outside. She developed a routine of alternating between caring for her babies and staring intently toward the warehouse district, as if she were keeping watch. After Dr. Reynolds left, Tom pulled out the anonymous letter he'd received. The paper was cheap, the typing basic, but the message was clear. "The old warehouse isn't what it seems. People are using it at night. Be careful who you trust." He spread it out on his kitchen table, next to the preliminary fire investigation report he'd brought home. The report confirmed the existence of the basement, along with signs of recent construction that hadn't been permitted by the city. Electrical modifications, new partition walls, and what appeared to be a sophisticated ventilation system, all installed without documentation. Ginger jumped onto the table, her paw landing precisely on a photo showing the basement entrance. She meowed insistently, something she'd been doing more frequently whenever Tom reviewed the case materials. "You know something, don't you?" he murmured, scratching behind her ears. "Wish you could talk, girl." The cat butted her head against his hand, then returned to the photo, pawing at it again. Tom's phone buzzed. A text from Jake. "Released from hospital. Ankle's just a sprain. Coming over to see the kids." He'd started calling the kittens the kids, and the name had stuck. Within 15 minutes, his truck pulled into Tom's driveway. Jake hobbled in on crutches, immediately making his way to the spare bedroom. The kittens had begun to recognize his voice, their tiny heads perking up at his arrival. "Hey, little fighters," he cooed, lowering himself carefully to the floor. "Uncle Jake's here." Tom watched from the doorway as his tough, seasoned firefighter of a colleague turned to mush over 5 small balls of fur. Each kitten had developed distinct personalities. Spark, the smallest and most demanding. Ember, the adventurous one. Ash, the quiet observer. Phoenix, the protective eldest. And Cinder, who seemed to have inherited her mother's intuitive nature. "I've been thinking about that basement," Jake said, while letting Phoenix climb his arm. "My mom, she used to work in building code enforcement. She always said that unauthorized construction usually means someone's trying to hide something. Money laundering, illegal operations. Look at this," Tom said, bringing over the letter and report. He spread them out on the floor between the kittens' beds. Ginger immediately left her windowsill post and sat beside them, her tail twitching. Jake studied the materials, his expression growing serious. "These electrical modifications, they're not random. This looks like someone was setting up some kind of operation down there, something that needed a lot of power and ventilation." A noise from the street made Ginger's head snap toward the window. Tom followed her gaze just in time to see a black SUV with tinted windows drive past slowly. The cat's fur bristled, and she let out a low growl, a sound he'd never heard her make before. "That's the 3rd time I've seen that vehicle today," Tom said quietly, making a mental note of the partial plate number he could see. "And Ginger reacts the same way every time." Jake looked between Tom and the cat, then back at the documents. "You think she lived in that warehouse before the fire? That she saw things?" "I think," Tom said slowly, watching as Ginger returned to the photos, "that she's trying to tell us something. And I think it's time we started really listening." He picked up his phone and scrolled to a contact he hadn't used in years, Sarah's old partner from when she worked as a detective. If anyone could help him make sense of this, it would be Detective Martinez. As he pressed the call button, Ginger settled beside him, her purr rumbling with what felt like approval. The kittens had clustered together in their bed, tiny paws intertwined, sleeping peacefully. Looking at them, Tom felt a fierce surge of protectiveness. Not just for these small lives he'd helped save, but for his community, for the truth that someone had tried to burn away. Detective Martinez agreed to meet Tom at the local diner the next morning. The early hour meant they had privacy, with only Mrs. Chun bustling around with coffee pots and knowing looks. Tom had brought copies of the fire report and the anonymous letter, spread out now between plates of untouched eggs and toast. I remember when Sarah used to bring cases here, Martinez said, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. She had a way of seeing patterns where others saw coincidences. She studied the documents with the same intensity Tom remembered from years ago. This construction work, it's professional, not some amateur operation. Tom nodded, pulling out his phone to show her photos he'd taken of the warehouse over the past few days. The SUV I mentioned keeps circling the neighborhood. Black Escalade, windows tinted past legal limits. Plates partially obscured, but I got some numbers. Your cat really reacts every time it passes? Martinez asked, her skepticism clear but professional. Ginger knows something, Tom insisted. You should see how she focuses on certain areas in these photos, how she responds to specific details. Sarah always said animals can sense things we miss. Martinez's expression softened at the mention of Sarah. She did say that, didn't she? Used to tell me about that old tomcat that helped her solve the Rodriguez case. She pulled out her notebook. Give me the plate numbers you have. I'll run them through the system. The diner's bell chimed as Sarah's old friend from high school, Emily Watson, walked in. She spotted them and hesitated before approaching their table. Tom hadn't seen her since Sarah's funeral. Tom, she said softly, I heard about the warehouse fire, about how you saved those kittens. She twisted her hands nervously. I've been meaning to stop by to talk to you about something I think you should know. Martinez's investigator instincts visibly kicked in. She gestured for Emily to sit. Mrs. Chin appeared with fresh coffee, as if summoned by some sixth sense for important conversations. I work at the bank now, Emily began, her voice low. In loan processing. About 6 months ago, someone applied for a large business loan using that warehouse as collateral. The paperwork looked perfect, too perfect. When I started asking questions, my supervisor told me to drop it. Tom and Martinez exchanged looks. Did you get a name? Martinez asked. The company was registered to a James Morton, but when I looked into it, the identity seemed manufactured. Perfect credit history appearing out of nowhere, business references that checked out but felt scripted. Emily's hands shook slightly as she reached for her coffee. A week after I raised concerns, I started noticing a black SUV following me home. Tom felt his pulse quicken. WH. And did you last see this SUV? That's just it. The day of the fire was the last time. It's like they vanished as soon as the warehouse burned. Emily looked between them. I should have said something sooner, but I was scared. Sarah, she would have known what to do. The mention of Sarah hit Tom differently this time. Instead of the usual wave of grief, he felt a surge of purpose. Sarah would have pursued this, would have dug until she found the truth, no matter the cost. You did the right thing coming forward now, Martinez assured Emily. We need to look into these loan documents. And Tom, those building modifications you mentioned, they might tell us what they were really using that space for. Tom's phone buzzed with a text from Jake. Emergency at your place. Cats are fine, but you need to see this. Go, Martinez said, gathering the documents. I'll start running these leads. Emily, I'd like you to come to the station later to make a formal statement. Tom rushed home to find Jake on his front porch, supporting himself on one crutch. His face was grim. Someone tried to break in, he said without preamble. Ginger scared them off. You should see the back door. There are scratch marks everywhere, and not from the cat. Inside, Tom found the kittens huddled together in their bed, Ginger standing guard beside them. On his kitchen table was a new envelope, the paper cheap and familiar. Inside was a single-typed line, "Stop asking questions about the warehouse." Ginger jumped onto the table, pawing at the note before looking up at Tom with those knowing eyes. In that moment, he understood something crucial. This wasn't just about uncovering criminal activity. This was about finishing what Sarah had started, about protecting not just lives, but justice itself. They're watching the house, Jake said quietly. Probably have been since you took in Ginger and her kittens. Tom reached down to stroke Ginger's fur, feeling her tense muscles relax slightly under his touch. Then let them watch, he said, his voice firm. Sarah always said the truth comes out when you shine enough light on it. Time to start shining. Detective Martinez called an emergency meeting at the police station that evening. The conference room walls were covered with photos of the warehouse, financial documents from Emily, and surveillance shots of the black SUV. Tom sat at the table, Ginger surprisingly calm in a carrier beside him. He hadn't wanted to leave her home after the break-in attempt. The loan documents were definitely fraudulent, Martinez announced, pinning up more papers. But here's where it gets interesting. The shell company that applied for the loan? It's connected to 3 other warehouses in neighboring counties. All 3 had fires in the past year. Tom leaned forward, studying the pattern. Insurance scams? That's what we thought at first, Martinez said, her expression grim. But the modifications in those buildings match yours. Same electrical setup, same ventilation system. And all of them had unauthorized basements. The door opened and Chief Richardson from Arson Investigation entered, carrying a thick file. Lab results came back from the debris samples. They found traces of chemicals consistent with drug manufacturing. High-end stuff, not your typical meth lab. Ginger meowed sharply from her carrier, drawing everyone's attention. Tom had noticed she did this whenever something significant was revealed, as if confirming their suspicions. There's more, Richardson continued. Those ventilation systems? They were designed to filter out specific chemical signatures. Someone spent a lot of money making sure nothing suspicious would be detected from the outside. Tom thought about the anonymous letter, the break-in attempt, the threatening note. They're cleaning up loose ends, he said slowly. The fire wasn't an accident. It was deliberate, meant to destroy evidence. But they didn't count on Ginger. Martinez added, a hint of amazement in her voice. A mother cat leading firefighters to her kittens? Perfect cover for discovering their operation. No one would question why you went into that specific part of the building. Chief Richardson spread out more photos. These were taken the day before the fire. Security camera across the street caught some interesting activity. The images showed men in work clothes carrying large crates into the warehouse. Notice anything odd? Tom studied the photos carefully. The way they're carrying those crates. Those aren't workers. Their stance, their awareness of surroundings. They're military or law enforcement trained. Exactly, Martinez confirmed. We ran facial recognition on one of them. Former Special Forces, now working private security for a pharmaceutical company that's been under investigation for illegal drug trials. The pieces were starting to fit together, forming a picture more dangerous than Tom had initially imagined. This wasn't just about illegal drugs. It was about unauthorized medical experiments, corporate corruption, and people powerful enough to cover it all up. Ginger suddenly became agitated in her carrier, hissing at the door moments before it burst open. Officer Chun, Mrs. Chin's son from the diner, rushed in. Detective, we've got movement at the warehouse site, he reported breathlessly. Multiple vehicles. Looks like they're trying to access the basement through the debris. Martinez was already on her feet. They're trying to recover something before we find it. Tom, you stay here with the cat. This is a police matter now. With all due respect, Tom stood, his voice firm. I'm the one they've been watching. I'm the one they try to warn off. And Ginger. He looked at the cat, who had calmed immediately when he spoke. She's been trying to tell us something specific about that basement. We need her there. Chief Richardson looked between them. He's right. Whatever's down there, that cat knows about it. And Tom's got more experience with the building's layout than any of us. Martinez hesitated, then nodded sharply. Gear up then, but you stay back unless we specifically need you. And Tom? She caught his arm as he turned to leave. Sarah would be proud of how you're handling this, but she'd also tell you to be careful. Tom lifted Ginger's carrier, feeling the weight of both the investigation and Sarah's memory. Sarah taught me that sometimes the biggest risks are the ones we don't take, he replied. When we ignore the truth because it's dangerous or inconvenient. The cat pressed a paw against the carrier door, her amber eyes fixed on Tom with that same intelligent intensity he'd seen the night of the fire. Whatever they were about to discover in that basement, Ginger had been trying to lead them to it all along. As they headed out into the night, Tom couldn't shake the feeling that they were approaching something bigger than any of them had imagined. The truth wasn't just hiding in that basement. It was about to change everything they thought they knew about what had really been happening in their quiet town. The warehouse ruins loomed against the stormy night sky. Police vehicles positioned strategically around the perimeter with their lights off. Tom crouched behind a patrol car, Ginger's carrier beside him. Through night vision binoculars, he could see 3 men in tactical gear attempting to clear a path to the basement entrance. "They're professional," Martinez whispered beside him. "Military precision in their movements. Just like you said." She keyed her radio. "All units hold position. Wait for my signal." A flash of lightning illuminated the scene, and Tom noticed something that made his blood run cold. The equipment they're carrying, those aren't recovery tools. Those are incendiary devices. They're not here to retrieve evidence. They're here to destroy it. Ginger scratched insistently at her carrier door. 2. Em had never seen her this agitated, not even during the fire. He made a decision that went against every safety protocol he knew. "If they set charges in that basement, the whole area could go up," he said quietly to Martinez. "There are residential buildings less than a block away. We can't wait." Before Martinez could respond, Tom's phone vibrated. The number was blocked, but he answered anyway, keeping his voice low. "Mr. Mason," a cultured voice said, "I believe you have something that belongs to us, a certain witness to our operation." The man's tone was calm, almost conversational. "The mother cat. She was part of our research program. Quite remarkable results, actually. Enhanced intelligence, improved cognitive abilities." Tom's hand tightened on the phone as he looked at Ginger, understanding flooding through him. Her unusual behavior, her intelligence, her desperate attempts to communicate. It hadn't been just animal instinct. "You used her for experiments," he said, his voice hard. Martinez leaned closer, recording the conversation on her own device. "Research, Mr. Mason. Groundbreaking research. Imagine the possibilities. Animals with near-human cognitive abilities serving as guides, rescuers, military assets. Ginger was our most successful subject, until she escaped, taking evidence of our program with her. The kittens," Tom realized. "They're not just ordinary kittens, are they? Second-generation subjects," the man confirmed. "Even more promising than their mother. We've invested millions in this program, Mr. Mason. Those animals are corporate property, and we want them back." Lightning flashed again, closer this time. In the brief illumination, Tom saw Ginger's eyes fixed on him with an almost human understanding. She hadn't just been trying to save her babies from the fire. She'd been trying to expose the truth about what had been done to her. "They're not property," Tom said firmly. "They're living beings, and what you did to them ends tonight." The man's voice hardened. "You have 10 minutes to bring us the cat and her kittens, or we level what's left of that warehouse with everyone near it. Don't doubt our resources, Mr. Mason. We've already demonstrated what we're capable of." "The other warehouse fires," Martinez whispered. "They weren't just covering up the labs. They were looking for her." The call ended. Tom looked at Martinez, then at Ginger. "They don't know we've already figured out what's in the basement, do they? They think their secret died in the fire." Martinez's eyes widened. "The evidence Ginger took, it must still be down there. That's why she keeps focusing on specific areas in the photos. She hid something before escaping." Tom opened Ginger's carrier. The cat stepped out, her bearing almost regal despite the tension surrounding them. "Show us," he whispered to her. "Show us what you've been trying to tell us all along." Ginger looked up at the sky as another lightning bolt split the darkness. Then, with deliberate purpose, she began moving toward the warehouse. Not toward the main basement entrance where the armed men were working, but toward a partially hidden drainage pipe that Tom had noticed during the fire. "Wait!" Martinez grabbed Tom's arm. "You can't seriously be thinking of following a cat into that basement." "Not just any cat," Tom replied, checking his flashlight. "A cat who's been trying to bring justice to light since the night of the fire. Sarah always said sometimes you have to trust more than just human intuition." Thunder rolled overhead as Tom made his decision. Sometimes he realized the most important choices come down to a single moment of trust. Sarah would have understood that. She would have followed the truth, no matter where it led. With Ginger leading the way and Martinez reluctantly providing cover, Tom began moving through the shadows toward the drainage pipe. Behind them, the armed men continued their work, unaware that they're SEC. Rhett was about to be exposed by the very creature they had created. The truth was waiting in that basement, and this time, Tom was ready to face it, whatever the cost. The drainage pipe was narrow but navigable. Tom followed Ginger's silent form, her white-tipped tail like a beacon in the darkness. Behind him, Martinez maintained radio contact with her teams, coordinating their positions around the warehouse. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness, and the air grew thick with a lingering smell of smoke and something else, something chemical and wrong. 5 minutes left on their ultimatum, Martinez whispered. Ginger led them through a partially collapsed section of the pipe that opened into the basement proper. The space was vast, much larger than the building plans had suggested, filled with the charred remains of sophisticated equipment. But the cat ignored all of this, moving with purpose toward a specific corner where the concrete floor met the wall. There, Tom pointed his flashlight at what looked like a loose panel near the floor. Ginger pawed at it insistently. Above them, they could hear the heavy footsteps of the armed men, now directly overhead. Martinez drew her weapon, covering the stairs while Tom worked to remove the panel. Inside was a waterproof case, the kind used to protect sensitive documents. Company research logs, Martinez breathed, examining the contents. Video files, test results, subject profiles, everything they did to her, to all their test animals. Names, dates, corporate signatures. Ginger suddenly tensed, her fur standing on end. A moment later, they heard a voice from above. "Time's up, Mr. Mason." It was the man from the phone. Last chance to make the right choice. Tom looked at Ginger, seeing in her eyes not just intelligence, but trust. Trust he'd earned that night of the fire when he'd followed her into danger to save her babies. Now she was trusting him again, to make this right. "Actually," Tom called out, his voice steady, "I think you're the one who needs to make a choice." He nodded to Martinez, who transmitted a signal to her teams. "Right now, every major news outlet in the state is receiving copies of your research files. Everything you did in that basement, everything you did to these animals, it's all coming to light." There was a long pause, then the sound of multiple weapons being readied. "You're bluffing," the man said, but there was uncertainty in his voice. "Am I?" Tom responded. "Ask yourself, how did one cat manage to outsmart your entire operation? How did she know exactly where to hide the evidence? What were you really creating down here?" "The files are already uploaded," Martinez added, her voice carrying clearly. "SWAT teams are in position. Your experiment is over." Another pause, longer this time. Then, "You have no idea what you're interrupting. The potential applications, the military contracts. What I see," Tom cut in, "is a group of people who forgot that intelligence, real intelligence, comes with conscience. Ginger didn't just escape your lab. She chose to protect her babies, to seek help, to trust in people's capacity for good. Your experiment succeeded better than you knew, just not in the way you intended." Lightning flashed again, illuminating the basement through broken windows. In that brief moment of clarity, Tom saw the shadow of Sarah beside him, felt her presence as strongly as he felt Ginger pressing against his leg. The sound of weapons being lowered echoed from above, followed by the clear voice of Jake. "Police! Everyone on the ground! Hands where we can see them!" The takedown was swift and professional. As Martinez's teams secured the suspects and gathered evidence, Tom sat on the basement steps with Ginger in his lap. She purred contentedly, as if knowing her long mission was finally complete. "You know," Jake said, limping over with his crutches, "I always wondered why Sarah spent so much time at the animal shelter near her precinct. She used to say animals could sense things about people that we miss. Guess she was right." Tom stroked Ginger's fur, thinking about all the ways love and justice could work through unexpected channels. "She was right about a lot of things," he said softly. "About never giving up on the truth, about trusting your instincts, about finding family in unexpected places." In the days that followed, the story broke nationwide. The corporation's illegal experiments were exposed, their other facilities were raided, and dozens of enhanced animals were rescued. But none showed the remarkable development of Ginger and her kittens, who had somehow evolved beyond mere experiments into something miraculous, beings capable of understanding not just intelligence, but compassion. Tom officially adopted all 6 cats, converting his house into a home filled with love and activity. The kittens grew into extraordinary cats, each displaying unique abilities that amazed the ethical scientists who came to study them. But more importantly, they became family. One evening, as Tom sat in his favorite chair with Ginger curled in his lap and her kittens scattered around the room, he looked at the photo of Sarah on the mantel. Her smile seemed brighter somehow, more present. "You were right, love," he whispered. "Sometimes the greatest mysteries aren't about what we lose, but what we find along the way." Ginger lifted her head and met his eyes with that knowing look, and Tom smiled, finally at peace with both his past and his future. In the end, it wasn't just about solving a mystery or exposing the truth. It was about healing, about finding connection, about discovering that family comes in all forms, even with whiskers and paws. The rain outside had stopped, and a warm breeze carried the scent of spring through the open windows. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, and Tom felt the familiar pull of duty. But now, surrounded by his unusual family, he knew he'd never face those calls alone again.